The moon wasn't supposed to rise twice, not in one night, not in our lifetime. The first ascent was ordinary, pale, full, gliding up over the ridge like a lantern hung by an unseen hand. But the second came without warning, silver swelling, from the east as if the sky had cracked open, and something ancient and patient had been waiting behind it. The miners called it the double rise. The elders called it recollection. The wolves just called back. You're listening to whispering narratives, where the dark still remembers your name. If the moon finds you before the dawn does, subscribe before the next howl, because tonight, the old curse remembers every bloodline that ever tried to forget. Now, breathe in the cold air. The story begins where the science ends. It was 2:43 a.m. when Elara Voss first saw the second moon cresting over the valley. She'd been tracking wolf patterns for a conservation paper, GPS collars, thermal drones, the usual antiseptic rituals of modern ecology. But when the reading started showing 2 heat sources for every collared wolf, she thought the data was corrupt. It wasn't. From her station window, she watched the forest breathe, fog rising in slow waves as though the trees themselves were exhaling. Her reflection in the glass split down the middle, one half human, the other flickering under silver light, the skin straining, crawling. For a moment she thought the glass was warped, but then her breath clouded the pain, and she saw her reflections, eyes move on their own. In the quiet, a distant howl rolled over the ridge. Not one voice, but many, weaving through the timberline like the earth was groaning in pain. The townsfolk below had stopped sleeping weeks ago. Livestock disappeared, power lines hissed. Children began sketching wolves with human hands. And every night, the moon rose a little closer. They'd built this town, Silver Hollow, on the bones of a mine that was never meant to be disturbed. Beneath its tunnels were carved symbols long before the first settlers arrived. Circular glyphs resembling lunar cycles, each etched with one phrase no one could translate. Lara had the inscription in her notebook. She didn't know the words. "We're alive." By the time the town's clocks froze at 3:33 a.m., something in the soil had awakened. Streetlights flickered, the air thickened, and static poured from car radios. A frequency that sounded almost like a growl. Dogs began to claw at doors. The old church bell tolled once, though no one had pulled its rope. And then came the sound that split the valley open, bone breaking like thunder under flesh. The first transformation didn't happen under the moon. It happened under the earth. The miners' descendants, men and women who had carried the blood of the first dig, felt it before they saw it. Nausea, tremors, the taste of copper in their mouths. One by one, they dropped to their knees, palms pressed into the ground as if it were an altar. Beneath them, something shifted, a pulse older than the town, older than their families, and then, in unison, every mirror in Silver Hollow cracked. Elara didn't scream. She recorded. Through her camera lens, she watched the first subject convulse, ribs distending, tendons coiling, hair sprouting in patterns that mimicked the lunar glyphs. The man's silhouette folded inward and outward, limbs reforming like molten glass under invisible pressure. And when he lifted his head, the silver light hit his eyes and the human part was gone. He didn't howl. He remembered, the moon's not a light, Elara. It's a lock. And tonight, it turned. As the valley burns in reflected moonlight, and the new beasts stalk the trembling pines, Elara realizes she isn't studying the wolves anymore. She's part of their data set. Her own heartbeat is syncing with the pulse in the earth. Her reflection's mouth keeps moving even when hers is still. The double rise has begun. Would you like me to continue to section 2, the pulse beneath the pines, where the first EI full transformation sequence unfolds in agonizing cinematic detail, bones, breath, and lunar rage? It'll carry the story deeper into dread, flesh, and revelation. Roughly another 700 words of escalating horror and myth. The forest didn't move. It shifted. Every pine, every shadow, every echo of breath seemed to slide 1 inch closer to the sound of a heartbeat pulsing under the soil. You could feel it if you stood still long enough. That wet, subterranean rhythm, like something enormous breathing through the roots. Elara stepped outside her cabin barefoot, the frost crunching under her toes. The second moon hung low, swollen, veined with faint streaks of black light. Her instruments had stopped, registering temperature. Everything read 37 degrees, as though the whole valley shared one body. The wolves had gone silent. That was the first sign something sacred, or sacrilegious, had begun. From the tree line came a whisper that wasn't the wind. Her name, drawn out, almost affectionate. Elara. She turned her flashlight toward the noise, its beams slicing through fog thick enough to hold a reflection. For a moment she saw herself, standing 20 feet ahead, staring back until the image blinked and dissolved into steam. The ground beneath her feet pulsed once. The trees groaned like a ribcage flexing. That's when the earth broke open. Soil and root exploded upward in a spray of mud, and from beneath came the first of them. One of the old miners, Samuel Hark, a man who'd been dead for 70 years. His body wasn't decayed, it was unfinished. Hair matted with clay, bones slick and red, skin trying to remember where to settle. His eyes gleamed like wet stones, his jaw trembling as if arguing with itself. He wasn't digging his way out of the ground was pushing him back. The pulse beneath the valley roared, a sound more felt than heard. Trees bowed, windows shattered. The town's stray dogs began howling, their voices twisting into something unnatural, something that harmonized with the heartbeat in the dirt. And Elara, poor, rational, brilliant Elara, finally realized what the readings had been trying to tell her. The wolves weren't multiplying, they were merging. The miners' bloodlines, diluted through generations, disguised by time, were answering a call they didn't remember. The double rise wasn't a celestial event. It was an awakening protocol, written in marrow, hidden in DNA like a secret waiting for the right frequency. And tonight, that frequency hummed through the valley like a buried siren. She stumbled back to her cabin, the walls trembling with each beat. The lights flickered in sync. Every flick a heartbeat, every pause a breath. Her laptop glitched, frames freezing and melting into distorted images of faces she didn't know. Behind each face, a wolf's silhouette, watching. The mirror by the door rippled. Her reflection leaned forward. It smiled before she did, then the pain hit. It began behind her ribs, that deep, ancient ache, as if her bones were being reminded of a shape they'd forgotten. Her breath hitched, her spine arched. The sound of muscle tearing was wet and intimate, like fabric ripping under strain. Her hands trembled, the nails blackened, lengthened, curved. She felt them want something, not to grab, not to hold, but to rend. A jaw cracked wide, a hot rush of saliva and blood spilling over her tongue. The scream that left her throat wasn't human. It wasn't animal either. It was a sound older than both, the sound of recognition. The reflection whispered, again, but this time the voice came from inside her head. "The moon doesn't curse, child. It collects." Outside, the other wolves answered. First one, then dozens, then hundreds. The valley echoed with layered howls, each carrying a tone of grief, rage, and reverence. The silver glow spread through the fog like wildfire, coating everything in pale light. Elara staggered to the window, half human, half memory, her vision stuttering between what was real and what was remembered. Through the glass, she saw the valley lit like a cathedral, bodies rising, transforming, reclaiming. One wolf stepped into the clearing, massive, scarred, familiar, her grandfather. He looked at her with sorrow burning in his eyes, a beast's eyes carrying a man's regret. His fur shimmered like wet steel under the double moon, and when he howled, it wasn't at her. It was for her. The sound went through her bones, through her blood, through her reflection. Her last human tear slid down her cheek and evaporated before it hit the floor. Every bloodline answers its moon eventually. Some just take longer to remember. The next dawn won't come, only the third moon, the one the sky's forgotten how to hide. And in that light, the new world will learn what the old one tried to bury, that the werewolf was never the monster. The werewolf was the memory. The second moon faded without setting. It simply peeled away, as though the night had shed its skin. In the emptiness it left behind, a third one rose, darker, heavier, pulsing like a heart too large for the sky. It cast no shadow, only gravity. Even the stars bent around it, trembling like iron filings around a magnet. Elara crouched in the doorway of what had been her cabin. Now it was a den. Walls claw-scored, air thick with breath and copper. She could still think, barely, but every thought was threaded through with the taste of blood. The voice inside her head had grown patient, almost paternal. "Breathe with it," it murmured. "The world needs its predators again." Outside, the pack moved through the timber line, silver blurs flickering between trunks, their movement too fluid for anything that remembered civilization. They didn't hunt for food, they hunted for sound. Every human whisper, every prayer muttered in hiding, drew them like static draws lightning. The survivors of Silver Hollow had gathered in the church, praying to a god that hadn't answered since the mines first opened. The bell hung crooked, its rope frayed, yet still it tolled once, a dry metallic sob echoing over the valley. That was enough. The pack turned their heads in unison. Elara felt the pull in her marrow. A command older than language, her claws flexed, her throat trembled with the urge to join them. But something inside her, that last shivering fragment of human defiance, whispered back, "Not yet." She watched as they descended upon the church. The fog swallowed everything except the moonlight and the motion. Pews splintered, glass screamed. The congregation's hymns turned into howls halfway through the Amen. When silence returned, it wasn't empty. It was sated. She stumbled into the open field, her bare feet sinking into the ash of what once was a road. The third moon painted the landscape in bruised silver, every shadow alive with twitching shapes. She could smell the iron of fear miles away, and beneath it, something stranger, hope. A small group of survivors were crossing the ridge, carrying lanterns carved from old mining helmets. Among them, a boy no older than 10, his face streaked with soot and moonlight. Around his neck hung a pendant etched with the same glyph Elara had seen in the mines. The sight of it burned through her new instincts like fire through frost. That symbol wasn't a curse. It was a seal. The child saw her and didn't run. He lifted the pendant, letting it catch the black light. "Elara Voss," he said, voice shaking but sure. "You're supposed to stop it. You're one of them. Who can choose?" Her snarl caught in her throat. The name, her name, was an anchor, dragging her back toward herself. For a heartbeat, she remembered everything. The research, the laughter, the old world that still believed in dawns. Then the pack's growls rolled closer, echoing through the trees like a tide of rage. She turned toward the approaching shapes, muscles coiling under skin that still couldn't decide what species it wanted to be. Her reflection flickered across the boy's lantern glass. Half woman, half omen. The voice inside her head hissed, "End the lie of mercy," but another voice, smaller, human, desperate, answered, "Mercy is the only thing left that's ours." The moon quivered, bleeding light across the treetops. The pack burst from the darkness, a blur of claws and memory. Elara roared, not in challenge but in command. The ground shook, The others hesitated, their fury confused by recognition. Her grandfather's silver-furred silhouette emerged from front, eyes glinting with something that might have been pride or sorrow. He bowed his head once, then vanished back into the mist. The attack never came. Instead, the pack began to circle her, low and uncertain, awaiting the choice she didn't yet know how to make. The third moon pulsed overhead. With every beat, the world tilted closer to its origin. Elara knelt beside the boy, pressed a trembling claw to the pendant and whispered, her voice half growl, half prayer. "Then help me remember how to end this." He nodded, and as the pack howled, the glyphs carved into the valley walls began to glow. Pale threads connecting forest to sky, beast to blood, hunter to prey. The pulse beneath the pines shifted again. It wasn't a heartbeat anymore, it was a countdown. When the third moon rises, memory chooses sides. Which one will you feed? The valley becomes an altar, the moon a blade. And as Elara leads the pack toward the old mine, where it all began, every footstep drums the same question into the frozen soil. Is humanity worth saving, or just remembering? The mine mouth yawned before them like a wound that never healed. Rusted rails vanished into blackness, the air thick with iron and old prayers. Elara stood at its edge, half-human shadow trembling in the third moon's light. The boy at her side clutching his pendant like a talisman against the world's relapse. The pack waited behind them, hundreds of eyes shimmering like wet coins in the dark. Not a sound, not a whimper, just breath, the kind that smells of age and hunger. "This is where they found it," she whispered. "The first bone, the one they mistook for a fossil." The boy nodded. His small hand brushed the mine wall, and the rock responded with a low, subterranean hum. "They didn't find it," he said. "It found them." They stepped inside. The temperature dropped to nothing. Condensation crawled down the timber supports like veins. Her claws scraped against stone that felt more like skin, warm, pliant, and pulsing faintly to that same rhythm that had haunted her since the double rise. Every few yards, old mining lamps flickered to life on their own, glowing with cold blue flame. The light revealed carvings no historian ever recorded. Moon phases looping endlessly in a spiral that ended, not at full, but at eclipse. Elara, a voice inside her, breathed. "You came home." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, a hollowed cathedral of rock. In the center stood a pool of mercury-bright liquid that rippled without wind. Suspended above it, chained in roots and iron, hung a colossal shape, neither skeleton nor spirit, but something in between. The parent beast, its ribs curved like archways. Its skull was lunar, cratered, cracked, still weeping light. From its mouth hung a single silver chain, and from that chain, an old miner's lantern, still burning. The boy gasped. "It's alive!" Elara could feel it breathing through her. Every inhale stretched her skin tighter. Every exhale whispered memories that weren't hers. Hunts beneath red skies, laughter around fires before language learned to lie. "The miners dug too deep," she murmured. "They woke the heart of the moon." A rumble answered her. Distant thunder that wasn't weather. The pack had followed. They poured into the chamber, claws clicking on stone, eyes reflecting the impossible light. The moment their gaze met the hanging corpse god, they knelt, involuntary, as though gravity itself demanded worship. The parent beast opened its single remaining eye. It wasn't fury that shone there. It was recognition. "Elara Voss," it said, not in sound, but inside her bones. "You are the split one, the bridge between forgetting and recall. Will you return the world to instinct, or gift it mercy?" Her body trembled. The human part screamed mercy, the lunar part snarled truth. She stepped forward, the mercury pool rippling beneath her feet like mirror water. Inside its reflection, she saw the valley burning under the third moon, children running, wolves mourning, men praying to light that no longer existed. "There's nothing left to save," she said. "Only something left to end." The boy grabbed her hand. "No, endings are just shapes waiting for another moon." He lifted the pendant. Its glyph flared gold instead of silver. For the first time in hours, days, centuries, the pulse beneath the pines faltered. The parent beast shuddered. Chains snapped one by one. The mercury boiled, spilling its glow up the walls. The mine shook as though the earth itself was inhaling. "Elara!" The voice inside her howled. "If you free it, there'll be no dawn." But she was already moving. Every step tore another piece of her humanity away, yet she kept walking, eyes fixed on that single lantern hanging from the monster's jaw. She reached out, seized the chain, and pulled. The light went out. Instant silence. The kind that's so absolute it rings. Then, one heartbeat later, the entire chamber exhaled. The mercury drained into the cracks. The glow dimmed. Outside, the third moon flickered, faded, and finally collapsed into ash across the stars. The parent beast's voice dissolved into her mind like smoke. "Remember me kindly, if you must remember at all." When the tremors ceased, only Elara and the boy remained standing amid the ruin. The pack was gone. No bones, no blood, only paw prints, turning slowly back into human feet. Her claws retracted, her reflection steadied. For the first time since the double rise, the forest was silent. She fell to her knees and whispered into the dark. "If the moon was a lock, maybe I just broke the key. Some doors don't open. They remember who turned the handle last." If you've listened this far, you already hear it breathing. Dawn creeps in, timid and grey. The valley exhales, but the light that returns feels borrowed, like the world isn't entirely sure it earned it. And as Elara climbs from the mine, her shadow lags a second behind, still howling, still hungry. Morning crawled over Silver Hollow like a frightened animal. The sun rose, yes, but its light felt thin, pale, exhausted, like it had traveled too far through darkness to still believe in itself. The fog had gone, the howls had stopped, yet the trees leaned inward as though listening for a voice that hadn't finished speaking. Elara Voss walked through the ruins barefoot. The ground steamed where blood had met frost. Every step she took sounded like memory trying to follow. The boy walked beside her in silence, the pendant dull and heavy against his chest. Around them the valley was changing, rapidly, unnaturally. Houses rebuilt themselves, walls straightened, glass melted and cooled into windows again. But there was no one inside, no faces at the panes, no smoke from the chimneys. Just the illusion of habitation, a world rehearsing life. She understood then, the mine hadn't freed them, it had rewritten them. The parent beast was gone, yes, but its breath still lingered in the syntax of reality. The world had reset, purged of its beasts, or perhaps perfected by them. The boy looked up at her. "They don't remember, do they?" She shook her head. "Forgetting is mercy's cruelest form. They found the church first. It stood pristine, as though fire had never touched it. The bell was whole again, the rope new and white. But when she pulled it, it didn't ring. It exhaled. A deep, hollow sigh that smelled faintly of fur and salt. The echo carried down the valley, and in its wake came the faintest whisper of movement. A flicker in the corner of sight. A paw print forming in dust, a heartbeat skipping in the soil. The moon, though hidden by day, still bled faint silver into the edges of every shadow. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. By midday the boy was gone. She didn't see him leave, only the pendant he'd worn lying in a pool of melted frost. Its glyph changed again. Now it resembled an open eye. Elara picked it up, the metal warm as skin. The hum that answered traveled up her arm, steady and slow, like a second pulse choosing residence. When she looked into a shard of glass at her feet, her reflection blinked a moment late. That was when she knew the curse hadn't been broken. It had been delegated. The government would come soon. They always did. Scientists with drones and drones with silence. They'd measure radiation, take samples, publish nothing. Silver Hollow would become a cautionary zone on a map, a scar wrapped in yellow tape, and she would stand at its border, smiling politely, offering data that meant nothing, because behind her eyes, the moon had already risen again. At night she dreamt of the parent beast's ribs arching over her, a cathedral made of bone. Inside it, humanity knelt and prayed to its own reflection. And every time they said, Amen, the echo answered in a growl. Weeks passed. The valley regrew its forests, deer returned, birds sang, but their songs carried strange syncopation, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat under the ground. Some nights, when the wind fell still, she could hear it, the pulse she'd thought she silenced. 1, 2, 1, 2, slow, waiting. She began writing again. Not scientific notes, scripture. Lines that came unbidden, written in a hand not entirely hers. The moon does not punish, it archives, and every name forgotten becomes a note in its next song. On the 30th night, the new moon rose, black, perfect, the kind of darkness that feels intentional. Elara sat by the window of her rebuilt cabin, watching the stars flicker like eyes trying not to stare. Her reflection in the glass no longer matched her movements. It smiled when she didn't. It turned its head when she looked away. In the yard, the soil stirred, softly at first, then with rhythm. Something beneath it yawned awake. She whispered, to the dark, voice calm, almost fond, I told you to sleep. The earth answered, not with sound, but with a tremor that rattled every bone in the valley. Dust rose like breath. And somewhere in that tremor, hidden beneath the illusion of peace, the heartbeat returned. Not a warning, a promise. Some valleys heal. Ours only rehearses the silence between howls. If you're still listening, you already belong to the next moon. Above Silver Hollow, the night folds its wings. Somewhere deep below, the parent beast dreams again. And the dream sounds a lot like breathing. It began with clocks refusing to agree. Phones insisted on 12:03, while kitchen ovens swore it was 12:11. Watches gained and lost seconds like nervous ticks. At first, people joked, Mercury retrograde, solar flares, bad firmware. But the drift never stabilized. Time itself developed a limp. On the 7th night after the valley reset, the moon rose over cities that had never heard of Silver Hollow. It looked ordinary, clean, coin-bright, yet its light felt heavier, as if it had learned something in our absence and returned with intent. Security cameras picked up a faint flicker at the moment of moonrise, frames missing as though the world blinked and forgot to reopen its eyes. Hospitals reported a spike in sternal pressure, patients pressing their fists to their chests, swearing they could feel a second heartbeat, slower, confident, not theirs. Dogs went silent at once across 10 time zones, then howled in the same chord half a minute later, a harmony that matched the missing frames. Elara read the reports with a still face and a shaking spine. She had left the valley because staying made the lie too easy. The world needed a witness who wouldn't be believed. She rented stale motels and traveled under names that tasted wrong in her mouth. The pendant lay cool against her sternum, glyph open like an eye that refused to blink. In mirrors, she practiced not flinching when her reflection arrived late. Some nights, it turned its head before she did, seeking the window, seeking the sky. The contagion wasn't a disease, it was a recollection. It spread not by touch, but by rhythm. Crosswalk signals began to syncopate. Walk, walk, wait, walk, walk, wait. Trains braked just shy of platforms, wheels humming a bone memory. Wind chimes fell eerily in time across whole neighborhoods, tolling a pattern that only the moon could count. streaming services experienced lunar stutter, a jitter that arrived precisely at the 33rd minute of any program. Videos blossomed with error tiles for 9 seconds, silver-toned, vein-threaded, like static had learned to breathe, and then resumed with the audio a half-beat deeper. People binged anyway, they always do. And afterward, some of them woke at 3:33 with copper on their tongues and fingernail crescents in their palms. The first public footage came from a parking garage in Duluth. A man froze under a security light, spine curving, shoulders rolling, as if shrugging off a coat that refused to fall. The transformation didn't complete, it didn't need to. Something moved under his skin like a tide dragging old boats free of silt. And in the camera's hiss you could hear it. The double drum of a borrowed heart, the promise of a shape. He returned to work the next day. No one mentioned the scratches on the concrete. A maintenance report marked them down as forklift error. In Sao Paulo, moonlight rippled down the sides of glass towers and pooled on the street like mercury. The birds avoided it. In Cairo, a vendor swore he saw paw prints in dust that blew away in a wind that never touched his face. In Warsaw, a child asked his mother why the moon had a door now. The mother didn't look. Parents learn not to. Elara followed the signatures. Clocks that limped, cameras that blinked, neighborhoods whose dogs harmonized. She wrote everything down in a notebook that filled itself, as if the world wanted an index and chose her hands to file it. At night she pressed the pendant to paper and listened to the faintest hum. A librarian at a desk stamping entries into an archive that smelled like wet fur and winter. She didn't look for the parent beast in the sky, she looked for it in people. Barista who flinched at the espresso machine's steam because it sounded too much like breath. A police officer whose body cam glitched at the same minute of every shift. A choir that lost pitch on full moon nights and spoke in one voice between songs. Keep the door, keep the door, keep the door. They claimed it was warm-up technique. They were wrong. Or practicing. News anchors laughed about lichen TikToks. The algorithm, faithful to fear, fed everyone teeth. On the 29th day, Elara stood on a coastal pier as fog dragged its belly across the water. The moon rose, quiet as guilt. Waves stalled mid-curl and then unrolled with a shiver. For a breathless second, the sea lay flat, mirror perfect, and she saw what the world wouldn't admit. A ribcage in the reflection, titanic and pale, arcing, under everything that floats, everything that drowns. The hum inside the pendant changed key. It was not louder. It was nearer. She felt it then, the truth disguised as mercy, that breaking the lantern had not ended the ritual. It had automated it. The key she snapped had scattered into filings, and every heartbeat carried a few. The moon's archive no longer needed a single vault. It had cloud storage now. We are the cloud. A boy's voice, her boy's voice, threaded the fog. You can't stop a song by silencing a single singer, he said, as if he stood beside her. You changed the chorus. She clenched the railing until it groaned. Is there a counter-melody? Not one that leaves us human, the air replied, tender as a threat. The city behind her exhaled. Traffic lights in unison, ducts whispering, elevators purring up spines of buildings that dreamed of forests. Somewhere, a siren misfired into a howl and corrected itself with an embarrassed cough. People laughed, relief cheaply bought. Dread is thrifty. It keeps the change. Elara lifted the pendant and pressed it to the underside of her jaw. The glyph warmed. Beneath the pier, something large rolled in the black water, too patient for hunger, too certain for rage. She realized she had stopped blinking with her eyes and started blinking with the world. When she turned to leave, her shadow rose a fraction of a second after her feet did. It shook itself like an animal waking, then settled obediently in place for now. Across the next month, countries would announce tidal anomalies without naming the moon, blame server drift without naming the pulse, cite non-specific nocturnal, Anxiety without naming the thing that wears our names back to front like a mask. Elara kept moving. Cheap motels, stranger names. The work of a witness who knows the verdict was written long before the trial. On the 33rd night, she sat in a diner off a state road while the radio slipped, almost imperceptibly, from bass to growl. Couples chewed slower. A trucker tapped the counter in a rhythm he didn't mean to know. An infant fell silent and stared at the window until its breath fogged a small, perfect moon. The waitress asked if Elara wanted pie. The question landed like a safe, human thing. A plate slid between two beasts wiser than to feed each other. Later, Elara said, after the tide turns. The waitress glanced at the clock. It said 12:03. Her watch said 12:11. Outside, the moon's light thickened, the color of milk that remembers blood. The pendant hummed, yes, not every echo fades. Some learn the room and move in. If you can hear the second heartbeat, you're already keeping time for it. In the distance, sirens take a breath and choose the older music. Elara stands, the door chimes stutter, and the night opens like a throat. Next comes the part no one forgets, the night we learn what a promise looks like with claws. The world did not end in fire or flood. It ended in recognition. Cities still glittered. Power still hummed. Humanity still pretended. But the sky had stopped pretending back. The seventh full moon after the valley's silence rose swollen and red, a wound reflected on every glass, tower, and windscreen. Across the hemisphere, the same breath left a billion throats. An inhale too long to be coincidence, too brief to be conscious choice. That was how the hunt began. Not a call, a memory. In New York, subways braked to a halt. The fluorescent hum turned feral, low, rhythmic, guttural. Commuters pressed to the windows as the tunnels filled with mist that smelled of pine and iron. Phone flashes caught what the cameras refused, eyes in the dark, glowing like coals, remembering their purpose. In Tokyo, sirens fell into perfect pitch with ambulance heart monitors. Patients sat up mid-defibrillation, mouths opening in unison to a sound that made glass weep. In Johannesburg, wolves no one had ever catalogued stalked the ridgelines of the mines. Their paws struck sparks from the ore. In every place where a promise had once been broken, battlefields, hospitals, courthouses, the air thickened with silver dust. History replayed itself in fang and breath. Elara felt it long before she saw it. The hum behind her ribs deepened into percussion. Every vein, a drum, every thought a snare. The pendant no longer hung, it hovered, a small sun that cast no light, only gravity. She stood on the same coastal pier where the sea had flattened for her before. Now the tide surged backward, drawn to the horizon's dark curve. Out there, the parent beast's shadow moved beneath the surface, vast and slow, a continent remembering how to breathe. Her reflection looked up at her from the water, lips moving before hers. "You broke the lock," it said. "Now keep the promise." She understood then. The hunt wasn't vengeance. It was housekeeping. Every creature that had ever drawn breath owed the moon a heartbeat. All those unpaid debts were coming due at once. The air tasted of old metal and newborn rain as figures rose from the surf. Half human, half recollection, men and women and beasts blurred by evolution's unfinished business. Their eyes mirrored hers. They were not pack or prey. They were proof. Behind them, the city flickered like a dying filament. Traffic lights blinked red, 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 then stayed there, as if color itself had chosen allegiance. She raised the pendant. It vibrated between her fingers, a tuning fork for extinction. If she released it, the resonance would complete, all blood, all memory, one howl forever. If she held it, the dissonance might fracture the rhythm, give mercy one last false dawn. Either way, the promise would be kept. The boy's voice rose on the wind, no longer child, not yet ghost. "You said you'd remember," it whispered. "Remembering is how it lives." Elara closed her eyes. For a heartbeat she felt everything. The first miner's pick striking bone, the first mother's scream echoing through fur, the first prayer, whispered to a sky already listening. She opened her hand. The pendant fell, slow as forgiveness. It hit the water and sang. The note spread across the planet. A ripple of sound too low for machines, too honest for gods. Wolves raised their heads in every language. The moon answered by bleeding light through every shadow, painting the world in grayscale memory. People didn't die. They rearranged. Some grew claws, some grew calm. Some simply remembered what the silence had tried to steal. Elara sank to her knees, half woman, half echo. The tide licked her face like a faithful thing. Above, the moon cracked open along its equator and spilled silver rain. Each drop that touched earth grew grass where nothing had lived. Each blade whispered a name once buried. The hunt ended not in blood, but in stillness. Predator and prey finally indistinguishable. When she looked up, the sky was crowded with reflections. Countless moons, each one a memory of a life that had chosen to keep its promise. Her reflection spoke one last time. The beast was never beneath the skin. It was the part of you that kept its word. She smiled, teeth bright, eyes calm, and whispered back, "Then let it keep me." The world inhaled. The pendulum of blood and mercy found equilibrium. Somewhere a clock struck 12:03 and 12:11 at once, perfectly wrong, perfectly right. Every promise has a pulse. Listen long enough, and you'll hear your own claws tapping to the rhythm. Subscribe, before your reflection learns the words. The screen fades to gray-silver static. Within the static, a heartbeat. Within the heartbeat, a whisper. Within the whisper, the next story already waiting for its moon. There is a silence that comes only after everything has howled. It isn't peace, it's accounting. The wind moves through the trees of Silver Hollow once more, gentle now, tracing the scars on bark where claws once wrote scripture. The houses stand emptied and perfect, waiting for voices they no longer remember. Grass has begun to grow where the mine collapsed. Each blade leans the same way, toward the east, toward the place where the sun pretends it isn't afraid. And overhead, the sky carries a pale scar, a line across the moon where it cracked and healed itself. Some call it a rift, others call it mercy. Elara Voss sits at the valley's edge, wrapped in the kind of quiet that tastes like aftermath. Her reflection in the lake is whole again, though it blinks too slowly. The pendant is gone. The hum remains, low and constant, like the world breathing through her lungs. She writes the final entry in the notebook, the way priests close doors. The curse is not a punishment. It is memory's method of staying warm. She lays the notebook in the grass and leaves it open, pages fluttering like the throat of a sleeping animal. Ink spreads in spirals until the words blur into symbols, and the symbols into pulse marks. She does not cry. The moon has taken that too. By midnight, the valley glows faintly, silver as a heartbeat seen through skin. It isn't magic, it's reminiscence. Animals move through the underbrush. Fox, deer, wolf, indistinct in outline. Each pauses to look at her, then continues on, calm, as if this is the world they'd been promised and finally received. Elara looks up. The moon seems closer again, watching, not judging. It wears its fracture proudly. In its light she sees the shimmer of other faces, those who remembered too soon or too late, those who broke and were remade. Not ghosts, continuations. A whisper rides the wind, neither male nor female, neither beast nor god. Everything you've become is what the world was trying to remember. She nods, almost smiling. Then I'll remind it kindly. The water ripples once. Her reflection smiles back, this time perfectly in sync. Hours later, dawn makes an attempt. The first light hits the mountains, rolls down through the pine canopy, and drapes across her shoulders like absolution. Birds sing, but their notes carry a strange cadence, 3 beats, pause, 1 beat, an echo of the valley's long heartbeat. She hums along without meaning to. From above, the world looks unbroken. Clouds drift, rivers wind, people stir in distant towns. But if you stand very still and listen beneath the morning chatter, you can hear it. A faint thread of silver weaving through the sound of every pulse, every machine, every tide. The archive survived. It always does. Elara turns toward the tree line and walks until she disappears into it. No trail, no destination, only the rhythm guiding her soles. Where she steps, the ground does not harden or soften. It remembers. And that is where we leave her. Not as savior, not as monster. As witness, because the moon keeps no heroes, only names. It whispers them on nights like this, when the air smells of iron and wet grass. When you glance at the mirror and find it waiting for you to blink first. Listen closely. The name it murmurs tonight is yours. At Whispering Narratives, we don't just tell stories. We keep the dark honest. If you made it through the moon's reckoning, then you already know the truth. Every story leaves a scar, and every scar hums when the moon is full. Subscribe before the next rise. Join the pack before the light changes color. Share this with the one friend you'd still recognize by scent alone. Some memories deserve witnesses. Some howls deserve to be heard twice. And if, later tonight, you hear a heartbeat that isn't yours, don't panic. That's just the story remembering your name. The moon is never done counting. Rest while you can. It's already learning your rhythm.